Today we're going to learn how to incorporate Alpine.js into custom WordPress blocks. I'm going to use Pinegrow to help speed up the block creation process, but these concepts are going to apply whether you're using Pinegrow or hand coding your blocks. Just the other day, I had to create a custom component with some tabs. And instead of doing all the JavaScript by hand, I decided that I was going to use Alpine.js because I knew that they already had a component pre-built. I love Alpine.js. It's super easy to use, it's very lightweight, and even though it can't do everything, the things that it does really, really well. So in this video, I'm going to show you how I do it, as well as some of the challenges that I've run into a few times and how to get over them. Let's start off real quick just by showing you what we're going to be building in today's demo. First of all, we have a super simple block here that just has the I love Alpine, and then a toggle that shows the content. And then below it is the real fun stuff. We've got our tab component that's dynamically pulling data from within the WordPress database. So here we are inside of Pinegrow. I've got a blank project. It's an index.html with Tailwind enabled. I've already set it up for WordPress, as you can see right here. So I'm not going to go through all these settings again since you can see it in any of my other videos. The first thing that we're going to do is just to get some basic Alpine things working. So if we come over to the Alpine.js website and click the big Getting Started button, it's got some sample code that we can start using right away. I'm going to go a little bit out of order just so that you can see how things work. So I'm going to take this H1 here, copy it, and over in Pinegrow, I want to drop this in here. So first I'm going to add a section and then a div. We'll move that inside the body. And then inside this div, I'm just going to paste that code in, drop it straight onto the canvas, and we don't see anything. The reason for that is because we haven't loaded the Alpine JavaScript yet. So doing that is really simple. Again, we come back to the Alpine website, grab the script line, and we're going to insert it onto the page. You see by default, it's dropped it into the section. I actually want to move that into the heading. So we're just going to grab it and drag it up here. Now refresh, and you can see we have the I love Alpine showing up. So this is saying that Alpine.js is working correctly. Let's make this a little bit easier to see. So to do that, I'm just going to select my section here and add a little bit of padding and a background color. I'll add a background gray 400. There, that's just a little bit easier for us to see. The next thing I'm going to do is take this one-liner and turn it into a WordPress block. So to do that, I will select the div that's underneath the section, come over to WordPress Actions, Block. I'm going to call it Alpine Test. I'll give it a title of Alpine Test, and we'll give it a category, and we'll register that category. I'll save this, export the plugin, and now when we come over to WordPress, Plugins, Installed Plugins, you can see that I have my Alpine demo plugin right here ready to activate. I'll come back to the home page, edit it. I'll click on my add block button, come all the way to the bottom, and I have my Alpine test. And we'll just move that right there. And you can see that I've got the block added, but you can also see that it's doing nothing at all on the page. Let's update this and look at it on the front end just to make sure that it doesn't show anything there either. And it doesn't. The reason for that is because we haven't loaded the JavaScript inside of WordPress yet. So now let's take care of that. And before I do anything, I'm going to explain that there's really two different ways that we can do this. We could choose to enqueue the JavaScript site-wide, or we could do it here at the block level. If you're building your block by hand, you've got a lot of options here. You can either do it from the CDN, or you can copy the files locally and enqueue them that way. Because I'm using Pinegrow, I'm a little bit more limited, so I'll show you how I have to do it. I'm going to start by showing you how we can use the script site-wide by using the Enqueue script WordPress action. So to do that, I need to find a script element, and this can be anywhere inside my project. I'm just going to use this one here that's in the heading. And I'll come over to WordPress Actions, and we'll do Enqueue script. Now, even though this already has the script defined in it, we're not going to be using that. I need to define it here inside the WordPress action instead. So I'm going to give that a handle of Alpine.js. And for the source attribute, we'll come back to the Alpine.js website. And instead of using this generic CDN link, we're going to come down to installation. And I'm going to hard code the version of Alpine.js into the CDN. So looking at it, we're hard coding 3.12.0. So I've copied that link. I'll paste it right in there and we'll put in version 3.12.0. I do want to load this in the footer, And I want this JavaScript to be available both inside the block editor and on the website. So I'm going to come down and choose website and admin. Now when I save, it's going to export my block again. I come back to my website and edit the page. We'll refresh. And now you can see that I love Alpine. So there we have it. Alpine.js is loading in the editor. And when we look at it on the front end, it's loading there as well. So that was the easy part, just getting the darn thing working inside of a block. Now, I want to show you why I'm not a real big fan of doing this. If I come over to my inspector and I take a look at the sources, we'll see that it's loading the JavaScript from the CDN on this page. But here's the deal. If I go to another page that doesn't have that block loaded, it's also going to load the JavaScript. And really, I just want this loading on the page that I'm actively working on. So instead of using the Enqueue scripts action, we're going to do it at the block level instead. So back in Pinegrow, I'm just going to remove this Enqueue scripts action. I'll come over to my block definition. And here under the more options, I've got the ability to include a script. Let's paste that URL in here. And you can see it says this file does not exist. When I refresh our page, you'll notice that it is still working. The reason for that is if I look inside of our block registration, it's got that CDN in the Enqueue script here. And this is just going to call a helper function that enqueues it. So even though Pinegrow is yelling at us over here a little bit, it still lets us save it and do what we want. But the truth is, we probably want to load this locally anyway. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing I'm going to do is just copy this URL. Now I'll come over to our projects. I'm going to make a folder called JS to hold some JavaScript. And we'll make a new file inside there. And I'll call this Alpine.js-3.12.0.min.js. And I will open this in the code editor. Now I'll come over and I will open that URL. And we're going to copy that JavaScript into here. So now that we have it in the file, let's get rid of this script. And we can see that it doesn't work. And we'll come back and we'll drop this onto our canvas instead. And when we refresh, you can see that we're now working again. And it's pulling the JavaScript locally. So now we can come back to the block definition. And instead of having the URL in here, we'll search for that JavaScript folder in the file. We'll save it, export the plugin. And now we'll refresh our editor. And when we look at it on the front end and check the inspector, you'll see under sources that we're loading the JavaScript locally. Okay, so now we have Alpine.js working inside of a block. Now we're going to start tackling some of the challenges. We're going to come back to the Alpine.js website. And up here in the start here, we've got some really nice sample code. And I'm going to grab this sample code for building a dropdown. And inside Pinegrow, we'll insert that right below our H1. And you can see if I turn on my test clicks button, when I click on toggle, it shows the contents. We'll save and export the plugin and see what happens inside WordPress. Let's edit the page. And there you can see it. It says your site does not include support for Alpine demo, Alpine test block. So this is our first problem. Let's take a quick look at the code and find out why. Here inside VS Code, I've got my blocks folder, my Alpine test folder, and we're going to take a look at the JavaScript file. And you can see right away that we've got 31 errors. So let's figure out just what the heck is going on here. As I look through, there we go, right there. The @ symbol is screwing with us. And that makes sense because Alpine.js was really meant to go into plain HTML. It wasn't built to go inside of JavaScript or PHP. So we do need to factor that in when we're using it. Luckily, this is a super easy fix. If we take a look again at the Alpine.js instructions, you'll actually see a note here that says that this @ sign is actually used instead of the X on sometimes just as a shorthand. So let's go ahead and replace that shorthand with the long version of X on. We'll come back into Pinegrow. This time we're going to open the code editor. We're going to find that @ sign and replace it with X on : in both places. We'll save export the plugin. And now when we refresh the page, we can attempt block recovery. And my toggle works. Take a look at it on the front end. Awesome. So that was challenge number 1 solved. Challenge number 2 is a lot more tricky, and this is with arrow functions. I mentioned earlier that part of the reason I ran into this was because I was adding a tab component. So let's go over to Alpine Components and take a look at things so that we can see what happened. Now, if you're not familiar with Alpine Components, this really is fantastic. You do have to pay for it, but it is worth every penny. These components really are top-notch. They look great. They've got minimal styling. If you use Tailwind, you can just pick them up and use them right away. They were well thought out in terms of usability and accessibility. And the best part is that for each one of these components, they've got a ton of documentation and videos showing you not only how to use them, but how they were built, why they were built, and why certain decisions were made. So this tab component, for example, has almost 30 minutes of video that walks you through step by step how they built this thing and the thought process that went behind it. This is incredibly valuable. So if you're looking for a set of components and you like using Alpine, I really recommend going with Alpine Components. Okay, so what we're going to do here is I'm just going to grab the code for this. And because this is a paid thing, I'm not going to show you the code. I'm just going to copy it. So here inside Pinegrow, I'm going to do this the quick way. And I probably shouldn't have made them both the same color. So let's change that. Just change that from body gray 400 to 600. And then inside the div, I will paste in our tab component. And when I click, you can see that it's working already. Now let's turn this into a WordPress block. So I'll grab this div. We'll put a WordPress action of block on there. I'm going to call this Alpine tabs. Category Alpine blocks. I don't need to register it this time. And we're going to save, export, and we will edit. But I don't see it here in the block inserter. And this generally happens when there's an error in the block. WordPress is not great about telling you that there's a problem. You've got to do some debugging on your own. So let's come back to VS Code and see what the heck's happening. All right, again, I've got my blocks here and we've got the Alpine test block. That works just fine. We'll open up Alpine tabs and let's take a look at the register PHP first. Everything looks fine there. Let's take a look at the JavaScript. 125 errors. Cool. So let's start scrolling a little bit. And right away, I'm starting to see some problems because I forgot to replace my @ signs with the X-ons. So let's change that and see what happens. I'll just do a search, @ symbol, replace it with X-on, and we'll start replacing them. Okay, so that's okay. Let's save it and reload again. Try to insert the block. And we still don't have it. Okay, so we're back to VS Code. And now we're down to 53 errors, so that's good. And here's where I'm starting to see some of the problems. Is again, we have characters that just don't play nice in JavaScript. Well, you know what? Since I already know that I want to turn this into a dynamic block, let's just go ahead and change the block type right now and see if it works better inside of PHP. So back in Pinegrow, we're going to change this block type from auto, which would be by default JavaScript block, and we'll just change this to a dynamic PHP block. We'll save and export, refresh. And we've got a block. Let's give it a shot. Okay, we're starting to see something. And I do notice a few things that we're going to want to tackle here. So let's take care of this right off the bat. The biggest problem is that we don't have any of our Tailwind styling. So let's save and update this, and we'll tackle that. We can very easily do it, again, by coming over to our block settings. And here I need to define a style. I come into the project directory, Tailwind themes. And we're going to do tailwind.css. This is our front end style. We are also going to need an editor style to handle some of the quirks inside of Gutenberg. So Pinegrow is nice enough to make a Tailwind for WP editor.css for us. And now when we refresh the page, it's looking a whole lot better. However, we still have the weird bullets, so let's take care of that in the code. To do that, I come over to my unordered list, and we're just going to come in and do list type of none. Refresh. All right, now this looks a whole lot better. Now let's check it out on the front end. And we have a problem. I see my tabs, but I don't see any of the content. Why could that be? Let's take a look at the inspector again. So yeah, so it's showing me my tabs, but I don't see my panel anywhere. Let's find out why that is. Once again, we're in VS Code, and now you can see that most of the logic for our block is going to be here inside the PHP file. And this took me a lot longer to troubleshoot than it probably should have. Can you see what the problem is? Let's go back over to Pinegrow and take a look at it there. Let's take a look at the code for our tabs. Now do you see the problem? I'll give you a hint. It's the arrow function. Because this character is a greater than symbol, it's screwing with our HTML. So we actually need to use the code for this instead of the symbol. And that code is going to be &GT:. And when we save this, you can see that it still works just fine there. We'll export that plugin. And on the front end, when we refresh, we have tabs that work. Okay, we are getting really close here. So the last problem now is when we come back to our tab components inside Alpine.js, you can see that it requires the focus plugin. And if we take a look at that, the focus plugin needs to be loaded before the Alpine core plugin. And what this focus plugin does is it lets us navigate these tabs using the arrow keys. You can't see me pushing the arrow keys, but I swear I am. And it's what's going to help make this more accessible. So now let's tackle issue number 3, enqueuing more than one script inside of a block. So once again, if we're building the blocks manually, this is something that's relatively easy to tackle. All we have to do is make sure that we're enqueuing this script before the Alpine core script. And we would just do that right here inside the block registration. However, Pinegrow only gives us the ability to enqueue one script in a block. So now we have a dilemma. Do we want to enqueue them both site-wide? That's definitely a possibility. Not a great option though, because then it's going to enqueue those scripts all across the site, whether this block is loaded or not. Or do we want to manually combine them into a single JavaScript that we enqueue here in the block? And that's what I'm going to do. So once again, we'll come over to the project tab, JavaScript, create new file, Alpine focus 3.12.0.min.js. And I'll copy this code from the CDN. And then I will append the code from the regular Alpine.js in there. I'm sure I'll get some hate for doing this, but you know what? It works. So now I have an Alpine.js file that only has Alpine in there, and I have one that also includes the focus plugin. Inside of my test block that only needs regular Alpine, I'm enqueuing that script. And inside the tabs block, I'm going to enqueue the one that has both. And yes, this does mean that any page that has both blocks is going to load Alpine.js twice. So if I knew that I was going to use Alpine on a lot of different pages, so maybe I was using it in the header for things like the menu, I might consider enqueuing it site-wide instead of putting it in as a block. That way it would only load one time. There really are no hard and fast strict rules here. You just need to think about how you're using things and what the implications are going to be. Okay, so let's save this and export. And now you can see I can use the arrow keys to move between my tabs. And the tab key brings me over to the focusable thing inside my tab. So as it pertains to Alpine.js, we've tackled a lot of things so far. We've learned how to include it in a block. We've tackled the XON issue. We've tackled the arrow function issue. And we've tackled the challenge of using plugins. Now let's round this thing out by making it do some cool stuff inside of WordPress. So if you remember from the demo, I had it pulling some posts for the tabs and then some post excerpts for the content. And I'm going to do that in our project using 2 different loops. Let's collapse some of this tree just to make this more readable. So I'm going to have 2 loops. I'm going to have one loop that handles my tabs, and that's going to have the titles of the post. And then another loop that's going to have the contents of the tabs, and that's going to have the excerpts of the post. So I'm going to put my first loop here on the unordered list. And with that, I'm going to come over to WordPress Actions, Show Posts. And instead of the main loop, we're going to do a custom query. I want to select my repeated loop item. That's going to be the list item. And then I want to filter this based on the tag excerpt2. And I don't have that option here inside my Show Post Smart Action. So I'm going to turn this into a regular action by clicking on this icon and accepting the warning. And when you look in here, you've got a ton of options as to how you want to format your query. I'm just going to choose tag slug excerpt2 and say yes, if it's in excerpt2, show it. For my button, I want that to be my post title. So let's save this. And the last thing that I want to do is take this list item and say don't export. The reason is because my loop is looping through this first list item. So it's going to show it once for each of the items that's in the database, and then it's going to show this other one. And I don't want this to show up at all. So I just say don't export. Let's save this and take a look on the front end. Refresh. And now I have some titles, so that's good. Let's take care of the content. I'll do a similar thing here. Add a show post action. Change it to a custom query. Set my repeated loop item to be this section. Change it to a regular action. Put in my slug, my options. Take this last one, don't export. And now inside of here, I'm going to take my paragraph, and I want that to show my post excerpt. I don't want to see that, and I don't really care about the button, so I'll take that out too. Save, refresh, and there it is. Dynamic tabs. I really appreciate you sticking with me through the end of this. And as always, if you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe or leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next time.